this video, I'm going to be talking about right hand and right arm technique. I'm going to focus mainly on the things that I do, and I'm going to break it down in the four motions that I tend to do, the opinion on what I'm doing. Either I'm playing rhythm, I'm playing runs, or I'm doing lead playing. Okay, and lead playing can be either single note phrases or cross picking. Now I would say that there are lots of different right hands out there. Everyone has their own kind of technique that they've developed. Some people anchor, some people use their fingers, some people anchor on the wrist, and so on and so forth. I'm going to talk about mine, but I would say that there are common goals among everybody. When you're playing rhythm, you want your rhythm to sound smooth. You don't, you want it to sound a certain way. Leads, or rather runs, you want your runs to be loud, not too loud, but they have to be heard. They have to overcome a band. So how do you do that? So your leads, you want your leads to flow, have good time. You want your hands and your arm to be relaxed. And so there's a lot going on, and it's hard. It's really hard to develop good technique, and it does take time. I've had to actually modify mine over the years, maybe 2 or 3 times, because the goal that I wanted, the technique that I have, didn't serve me well in order to accomplish those goals. So I had to change my right hand and my right arm. Which is hard, which is difficult. But let's talk about motions first. What's actually happening in all the motions that's happening as you're playing? Well, starting from your fingers on your pick, as far as pick hold goes, just real quick, I tend to kind of hold my pick on this, not necessarily on the top. What I'll do is, if I'm playing single note phrases, I'll curl this first finger in so that my pick now lands on the top of my finger, and then it also forces the pick to point downward. So I'll tend to do that. If I'm playing runs and things, I'll tend to play flat to the strings, and rhythm, I'll tend to play flat to the strings. Okay, so that's my pick hold. But that's the first motion. Actually, there's finger motion involved. And not only that, but there's finger motion this way involved, where you're darting in and out of hopping over strings. And when you're cross picking, you have to be able to do that. So that's motion involved. The reason why I point those out is I see a lot of people, they lock their fingers. These aren't moving at all. And you don't want to necessarily be conscious as if the motion is not necessarily originating at your fingers, but you want your fingers to be nice and loose and agile, and you want those degrees of freedom to be available to you and to your brain as you're playing. So there is motion involved in your fingers, and as far as wrist goes, there's hinging of the wrist, and then there's a rotation at the wrist as well. You can rotate this way, but usually there's some kind of a break that's involved in your wrist, and what I'll talk about that is, this is flat wrist, straight wrist. This is a break, or this is a break. So there's more. This is more break. This is less break. This is flat. Okay. So there's hinging at the wrist. In order to get a rotation of the wrist, the more break you have in your wrist, then for a given rotation or movement, I have more movement over the strings with my pick, the more break that I have. Okay, so the less break I have, less movement. And then there's also hinging at the elbow that happens. Okay, so let's talk about first playing rhythm. And this is important, I think, is you should have somewhat of a break in your wrist while you're playing rhythm. Why is that? Well, if in order to cover the strings, if I kept my wrist straight, all the motion now has to come from my elbow. If I rotate my wrist, my pick doesn't really go anywhere. If I have a break in my wrist and I rotate, my pick now really travels a lot more. So if I play with a straight wrist, you tend to get kind of a stiff, kind of choppy sound. And notice this part of my arm is having to move up and down quite a bit because I don't have because I'm playing hinging all from my elbow. And if you can make that work, great, but you're probably going to get pretty tired, especially when the song gets faster, because I doubt if you're going to be able to keep that up, because when you're down here, you got to go back up, and your whole arm has to lift up in order to hit that string. It's a lot easier to play faster if you got that break. If you got that break in your wrist. And notice this part of my hand is really, or my arm rather, is not moving up and down. It's really just staying stationary. I don't have to, emphasize a lot of strums as I go. What Larry Sparks will tend to do, so he'll just go. So you don't need to play a lot of strummies, as you go faster, but that break in your wrist allows you to be more efficient in your movement. So it's important to really develop that during your rhythm playing, okay? Now, if you notice too, my pick tends to be a little flat to the strings. That's what I tend to do when I'm playing rhythm. But there's motion in my fingers. Everything's loose. I'm not locking anything down. Now let's talk about runs. Okay, so runs, like I said, you want them to be loud enough. They have to overcome. There's a whole band playing. There's a banjo. He's going through his break. He's playing really loud. So you got to be able to, put a nice firm G run at the end of it. And if you're playing without using what I call what's called the rest stroke, you're not going to be heard. So learn the rest stroke, and there's a separate video that I did on the rest stroke. But what I'm going to talk about in context of this video is what is your right hand doing. So while you're playing rhythm, so you're going to pause, and now to play the rest stroke, what I do is I rotate my hand 45 degrees. Okay. Because if I try to hit that string with a 90-degree angle, and the key that I talk about with the rest stroke is not pick but push, I can't really push through that string, But if I rotate my hand, now I can push through that string, and my pick kind of drags over the string and lands on the string below it, and you use that to catch yourself. So that's the rest stroke. But what my hand is doing is I'm actually rotating and I'm resting my pinky finger. So you need something to stabilize your hand while you're doing these rest strokes in order to make them firm. So when you're trying to play something, firm, I don't call it loud, I call it firm. You have to stabilize your hand. So that's what I'll do. So when I'm playing rhythm, and I'll do this for all runs too, whether bass runs between chords like this. So that's important. So again, sounds, what are you trying to accomplish when you're playing rhythm? You want your runs to be meaty and thick and loud enough. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about lead playing now. What's going on? So what I'll transition into when I'm playing lead, if I'm playing single note phrases, I'll tend to do that. What is that? So, and many people accomplish this in different ways. Again, when I'm playing single note, especially if you're going faster, which I'm not a speed demon, but so as you're playing, your motions kind of over the strings. The faster you go, they shrink for one. Also, I would say this isn't common, is that if you put too much depth of the pick into the strings, it's hard to get through the string because it tends to get caught. Every time you get caught and it's not pushing or flowing through the strings, you break up the flow of your playing, and there's usually tension that happens. And if you feel that happening, you need to disengage. You don't want to teach your body, that tension. So you want to release that. So depth of the pick into the string is really a key when you're playing these single note phrases. And how do you accomplish that? Well, I do it by referencing off the pad of my thumb and the side of my thumb. And so I'm actually, so you can see if I'm doing this, I'm actually picking out somewhat, but it's rotation of my wrist that I employ when I'm doing those single note phrases. Okay, and that arm, where the muscles, right up here. Okay, so these muscles are involved, and you'll notice if you're playing a lot, or at least I notice, is that these muscles tend to get balled up and stiff and tight and sore. And so you might have to release these muscles, So have a massage, if you know somebody who's really good at it, or your partner, can help kind of release these muscles. There's also a stretch that you can do that I've learned. That's you bend your wrist, if you do it with one hand at a time. Now notice this flat part of my elbow is facing here. What you want to do is rotate that. So when you rotate that, you create more distance and you stretch those muscles. Okay, and then you want to do this one as well. You want to do this one first, actually. Okay, and if you're on a table, you want to do both hands at the same time, and then go like this, and then rotate your elbow. Okay, so that's a good thing you can do. Let's get back to the depth gauge. So, like I said, if you want just enough pick to go through the string, and that's what I use as a depth gauge. I use the soft part of my hand, or my thumb, and my side of my thumb, as a depth gauge as I'm playing. Some people can do it, and my tendency is to keep my fingers curled. That's my natural state. Some people they have their fingers are out, and they reference off the top of their guitar. That's their depth gauge, and that works great for them. That doesn't work as well for me. Some people actually anchor, so they'll kind of plant fingers on the top of the guitar, and then what that does is gives them a point of that, and then they'll rotate, off those fingers, and then what that does is again, when you're playing these single note phrases too, is you're trying to stabilize your hand. This helps me not only as a depth gauge, but helps stabilize my hand. Okay, and some people stabilize their hand with their fingers. Some people actually plant their fingers and stabilize that way. But when you're playing these single note phrases, you need to achieve good pick depth. So you can't get too deep. You want to get deep enough, and you want that sound to flow. And so however you can achieve that is really up to you. Some people anchor, their wrists as well. And I used to do that when I was a kid. We didn't have YouTube videos and things. All I had was my mentors around me, and there really weren't that many who could flat pick. So, I just kind of developed my technique. But then when I saw somebody who could really play, and I would say, what are they doing? And I'd really study their arm and their wrist and their hand, and I would practice in front of a mirror, and to try to get that same motion that they had. And that's another good thing to do, right? Is practice in front of the mirror. So if you're trying to imitate somebody, not really you're using them as an example, and you want to get close to that. You want to try to achieve that same thing. A mirror is a really good tool. So, what about cross picking? Well, when I cross pick, there is finger motion involved. So I am doing. So I do cross pick and I use my fingers a lot. And I tend to float my hand, and at times I'll put my finger down, my pinky finger. Okay, so that's what I'm doing when I'm cross picking. So. So let's review again just real quick. So the motions, when you're playing rhythm, important to have that break in your wrist. You want to keep everything loose. You want to keep your fingers loose. Everything, your elbow. You don't want anything to be locked down, because when you lock down, you're limiting the degrees of freedom that your body has available. So we're all one big adaptive system, and we're all trying to adapt and achieve certain things. And keep your ear and your eye on the sound goal that you want to achieve. And a lot of times your body will kind of naturally just adapt to what it is that you're trying to get to. So don't necessarily try to impose a certain motion. I mean, I will do that if I'm just trying to work on something, but there's an integration or a synthesis phase that has to happen, and that you can't really think about. You got to kind of check your brain out and just play with a jam or whatever, and try to integrate what it is you're working, and that can be hard. So again, lead, breaking your wrist is important. When you're playing runs, rotate, put a finger down, play a restro. Playing like leads, you got to learn to you're learning how to play with flow and fluid, and you make your notes fluid. And like I said, what I tend to do, is to reference. And I'll sit there and practice like this. I'll just hit one note. And I'll sit there with a metronome and try to just, keep up with the metronome. Start slow at first, okay, but single note lines they're hard, and people do different things with their right hand, and a lot of times when you're watching someone play, you don't realize you're looking at years of practice and years of an evolutionary process it took them to achieve a certain technique. So be patient with yourself. This is something that's going to take, probably years. So, but be kind to yourself. Do those stretches. Make sure these muscles are nice and loose, and work on those single note phrases. If anchoring works for you, or some kind of tight reference for anchoring off your fingers, if that's what you've learned, I know that a lot of ex-banjo players, because when you're playing banjo, you tend to put these fingers on, you're playing like that, and that's fine. That works for them as long as they're achieving the same kind of sounds as long as they can execute, you know. And is again, you can do fingers, you can do wrists, you can do a lot of things as long as the sound that you want, that achieve the sound you want. If you decide, you know, that no longer works, that you like to do something different, then that's where it takes a lot of training and a lot of energy to really focus on that one thing, and then synthesize it into your playing, you know, and that's kind of a give and take over time. That's what I've learned. Okay, and then of course when I cross pick, you know, there's a darting motion. I would say when you're trying to cross pick, start really slow. And you might want to either reference or anchor off like the palm of your thumb or the soft part of your thumb. And when I cross pick, what you're noticing is I do alternating. I go up, down, up. Okay, a lot of people, I used to try, I used to do the down, down, up, or down, 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 I don't know. There's lots of different cross picking, but you know, I've learned in a lot of my breaks, I've kind of emulated the banjo player. So I like that down, up, down sound because it sounds more like a roll of a banjo. But maybe I'll do another video just on cross picking. But as far as right hand, I really hope that helps you. Leave some comments. I will try my best to, you know, answer questions and maybe post other videos if you have. If there's something that I didn't really cover well that you wanted to hear about. Okay, take care. Bye.